Welcome to SBI's Enablement Insights podcast, hosted by SBI Managing Director of Talent Development, Makela. In this episode, Ray sits down with Phil Putnam, a sales enablement leader with over 20 years in tech, to explore strategic negotiation techniques that go far beyond closing tactics. Phil shares how successful negotiation starts with value-driven selling, the critical importance of understanding buyer motivations, and why preparation separates top performers from the rest. Together, they discuss how to navigate complex deals with multiple stakeholders, master the art of trading versus conceding, and transform negotiation from a defensive endgame into a strategic extension of your entire sales process.
All right, hello, and welcome to this podcast. I'm Ray Makela, and thrilled to be back today and joined by a colleague, Phil Putnam, to talk all things negotiation. And this is a topic that both of us are extremely passionate about, and we spent a considerable amount of time comparing notes and talking about and helping our clients with. So I'm excited to dive in and talk about some practical takeaways and things that we've learned along the way and that we're seeing with our clients. I think that can help sellers with their negotiations and specifically focused on sales negotiation. But Phil, before we jump into the topic, maybe I could just have you introduce a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you're coming to this topic today.
Sure. So, hi everybody. I'm Phil Putnam. I'm a Leo who loves to laugh. No, in addition to that is true. So I had the fortune of working primarily in tech for a little over 20 years, and spending a lot of time selling. And in all different types of roles, not only selling in pre-sales, but selling in customer success roles, leading sales, executive level sales enablement leadership. And also through that time was able to see the market go through so many different iterations of itself. And so why I'm excited to talk about this topic in particular right now is because the current market negotiation skills are really, really vital. Especially for sales organizations who are struggling to maintain the average contract size they need and to not get really killed on having a lower price and so having to have a higher transaction volume each quarter. So I think those are some of the things that really intrigue me about this for today's sellers and today's sales leaders, and a bit of the background that brings me to the topic.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, I think we've seen it a lot across industries even and in different segments where people may have cut contracts during COVID that they were being creative, or maybe even they had so much demand they didn't really have to worry about it. And now those are either coming up for renewal or they're having to defend contracts, or frankly, sellers are having to work harder for every deal than maybe they did a few years ago. And yeah, so I think it's more important now than ever. Let's chat a little bit about, when we're thinking about a strategic sales negotiation. And one of the things I love about the program we provide is, we're not talking hypothetical, hostage negotiations or, major league baseball player contracts or anything.
Yeah.
These are sales negotiations and being prepared for that discussion. But what are some of the biggest things that you see sellers maybe getting wrong, or getting off track, and how should they show up differently or approach those situations differently?
Sure. Well, I think the most foundational truth of great negotiation is that it is an extension of what you've sold or how you've sold up to that point. So to answer the question as asked of, what do we often get wrong as sellers and sales leaders about negotiation? I think the biggest thing is that we think that negotiation is a stage in a deal process that comes near the end. And that's not the truth. I mean, it is tactically the truth. There is a stage called negotiation and it comes near the end, but you are able to prepare and lay a foundation for successful negotiation from the very start of planning your outreach, your first outreach to your prospects, and then as you go through the opportunity. And so in that sense, I think it's really impossible to have a meaningful conversation about value-driven negotiation without talking about value selling, because that's really where you gain a lot of your power. By definition, I think a successful negotiation results in a win-win outcome for all parties. We're not talking about you win, I lose, or I win, you lose. Only one set of people are going home happy from that.
Right.
So I do think that the reason why thinking about how you sell as laying a foundation for effective negotiation is so helpful is because you are essentially setting up various value levers that you can trade on and pull on other than price when it comes time to actually negotiate and trade. And so speaking to the difficulties of extracting the amount of revenue you need to get out of this market every quarter, approaching negotiation in that way is a really important tactic.
No, I think that's spot on. And I think we do often wait too long or leave it to the end of the process. And then I'm always amazed, right, that sellers are surprised that procurement gets involved or that they're trying to commoditize them at the end and compare them to a lesser product. And I think that's exactly right. If we haven't sold value and really established that value in the mind of the buyer to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
then it is just, tips and tactics and things at the end, which there's nothing you can teach somebody um, that can manipulate the buyer into, paying full price if they don't want to, or if there are multiple stakeholders involved.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think we need to think about it as a larger process as we go through. One of the things I know we talk about in the program and we always get into is just how important the power dynamics
Mm-hmm.
play in a negotiation. And I think often sellers kind of underestimate their power. They think, well, I've got to
Mm-hmm.
get this deal. And, they give maybe the buying party or procurement more power than they deserve, or when we start to get, squeezed there. How do we think about that? And maybe how can the sellers come in a little differently, thinking about the power they do have in that negotiation?
Sure. Well, I think the first part is each seller's mentality about their own power. Whenever we talk about power in negotiation, my mind automatically goes to speed. And I think with the way that most sellers receive messaging from most sales leaders, the message is you have to move quickly. I mean, time compression in sales it's just a constant bear on your back. That 90-day cycle is brutal. And so I think the idea is that if you dig your feet in and you leverage the power you actually have, you are slowing things down.
Hmm.
And that's bad. And that's not bad, right? So I think what it does is it does set up sellers to misunderstand or consciously minimize their level of power because they think it's going to jeopardize their success when they're selling and slow things down. That's the first thing. And then, like you already mentioned, it is important that sellers understand that they do have power. And
Hmm.
it's not an either or. Both the seller and the buyer, those communities of stakeholders, they both have power in the negotiation. They just might have different forms of power, or they might have the same forms of power in varying degrees. And I think when you look at power, you have to look at the individual nature of each deal that you're in.
Yep.
Now, there are some overarching concepts you can apply to it, but each negotiation is its own environment, its own negotiating space. It's going to range anywhere from strategic or from tactical to collaborative. And you need to treat it as its own little ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I think doing that inventory can be really helpful just to say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, actually, we do have power here. Maybe it's the switching cost. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're holding you a gun to your head to lower price, but by the same token, they're never going to be able to replace the capabilities you provide. And so, maybe it is just a bit of posturing. Or I think the other thing we see is understanding the customer's drivers to the point where
Mm-hmm.
then we can accommodate or show them how, hey,
Yeah.
you want to launch this, next quarter, and we're positioned to be able to do that and support you,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody else can potentially.
Yeah.
So, what are those situations where that gives you a little bit more swagger, right? A little bit more confidence going into that negotiation.
Sure. So let's talk tactically too, some of those
Yeah.
levers, right? Because it's easy for us as sellers to know that price and features are always going to be value levers to pull on, but there are so many others. There is
Yeah.
time frame, there's capacity, There is contract terms. And I'll put some examples here to bring this to
Yeah.
life. If you're a company that sells manufacturing capacity to people who can't manufacture their own products, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's clothing, whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? The customer's ability, the buyer's ability to not only get the price they want, but also get on your manufacturing schedule, right? Because it's a manufacturing plant. There's not that many options, right? And so you have to make sure that you can get them into the schedule so they can get to market on time. This is incredibly important. Say that it's a smaller company, like a startup, and they're only bringing one product to market right now. And their goal is to get it to market so they can prove to their venture capital mommies and daddies that they deserve more money.
Right.
Right. So that's a really highly valuable thing that can be negotiated on is schedule and capacity. Also contract terms, not only duration, but also cancellation terms, shared liability, payment terms. Those are all things that if you value sold before you start value negotiating, you're going to have a full set, an array of levers that you can potentially pull on that will allow you to maintain the price that you need to stay in and also get that win-win outcome.
Yeah, which, goes back to good selling skills, right? The more we can understand what's most important and how we can position that, then we can work with the customer. And again, you're not hitting them over the head with it, but
Mm-hmm.
at least you can understand, well, no, you said that these were the three most important things. Here's how we're going to accommodate that. We had a medical device company, a medical surgical equipment provider that we were working on with this program on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we didn't really appreciate until we got into really understanding the market is
Mm-hmm.
the surgeons that use their equipment were so passionate about it. They literally said, if you switch equipment, we're going to leave and go to another clinic. Like they did not want to operate with
Yeah.
brand X, right? And so again, not you don't want to overplay that card,
Mm-hmm.
but that gave them an incredible amount of negotiating position to say, well, no, we want to keep your doctors happy, right? We want to
Yeah.
make sure we're evolving and continuing to be top of market. And that's why you're paying a little bit of a premium, right? And so
Yeah.
what else can we do to, work through this deal with you, but we're not going to lower our price because that's the value proposition that we bring.
Yep. And your example there goes to also what we talked about earlier with understanding the unique nature of each negotiation that you're in. With that, where you have a strong preference among your existing user base to renew, that's a renewal sale or that's an expansion sale.
Yeah.
That's not a greenfield sale. So I think that we as sellers and sales leaders, we have to be very smart about focusing on the information at hand. And I do think that there's always a very strong push, especially from sales leaders, to templatize, playbook, and scale things out as much as possible. And that, frankly, does not reflect the way that buyers want to buy today. I think everybody is much more conservative with their money. There are much greater and more difficult and rigorous internal approval processes for funding decisions that our buyers have to get through. And so everyone is looking for something that not only feels like the right value message at the right price, but it has to feel tailored to their situation. They have to see themselves in your solution. And if they can't do that, you probably don't have the edge for the win.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I mean, are there ways that you are helping clients get, I guess, appreciation or get credit for the value they're bringing before they go into the negotiation? I mean, I think it is part of understanding the full package, right? Before we
Mhm.
start haggling or nickeling diming at the end of the sale.
Yeah. And it goes back to really essential selling skills. You have to discover, and you have to discover thoroughly, and you have to discover on the buyer's terms. If you go in with an idea of what you need to accomplish, if you go in thinking, I have to sell this because my leaders have told me we need to sell X amount of this quarter, you're already at a disadvantage because you're
Uh-huh.
not listening. You're
Uh,
not fully discovering. That's the first thing. Secondly, you must consistently qualify as you go throughout the deal. constantly qualify and requalify. And what that does for you is it not only helps you understand if you actually have a deal that has a chance and is therefore worth your time,
Right.
but also it calls you to discover and rediscover. And when you do that, when you qualify and consistently discover throughout the sales process, you are consistently realigning your value messaging with what the customer is looking for. I'll add this also, sales processes are of varying duration. So especially ones that are more than 3 weeks long, which is most of
Right.
them,
Right.
honestly, there's a great chance that the needs and criteria are going to evolve. I mean, some of you listening, you have an average sales cycle of maybe 18 months.
Right.
There is no chance that what they need is not going to change somehow over the course of 18 months in today's world. So you have to keep in contact and communication with your buyers, because you're constantly checking if your value narrative of this deal that you're basing it on actually is still applicable based upon their conditions.
100%. And yeah, not only are the criteria going to change, the buying committee may change, the economy and external forces may change. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that we're introducing friction in a number of different places,
Yeah.
throughout that sales cycle, and we need to anticipate and get ahead of it. I think is the message there. And I
Sure.
think the better we can do packaging that value when we start to get commoditized, or when procurement comes in and says, well, no, you're just like the other guys, but you're more expensive.
Mhm.
We need to fight that, right? That it is not an apples to apples. And here's why. If our sponsors believe that, and if we've gotten them to appreciate that this is a bigger and better solution,
Mhm.
then they can make that negotiation often easier, or even go away and just say, no, this is the direction we want. Have you run into that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And where my mind goes with that is preparation is the solution for that. You know, the I think you asked at the start, what are some things that sellers don't do that they can do to be more successful in negotiation? Preparation is everything.
Yeah.
I think that there is sort of this pseudo sexy ideal of like the seller that walks in and just in the moment can negotiate by instinct. Crap. Like, yeah,
Right.
maybe you're a charm based seller, but there's no such thing as charm based negotiation. I'm sorry. Um, the ability to plan both emotionally and tactically is available to you and is really essential that you do it. And we actually dig into this in great detail in our value driven negotiation course at SBI. And it's one of my favorite things. First, because even after 25 years of selling, um, I still get a higher emotional temperature when I go into a negotiation. That's just my personal response to that setting. So it's critical for me to understand that there are ways to manage that emotional temperature. And the way that I always think about it is basically negotiation, and especially objection handling, is just discovery with a deep breath at the start. That's all it is. It's just discovery with a deep breath at the start. Now, we're sellers. We discover all day long. Like, we should be the best at that in any room that we're in. And that's easy for me to process. So it's like, oh, I can do this. This is just discovery in this particular setting. The other part of our program that I always love so much and I've used in my own selling since I've started teaching it
Uh-huh.
is planning out your offers and planning out your trades. And this is another thing that goes against that like cowboy cowgirl idea, of somebody
Right.
shooting from the hip in a negotiation. We've all seen way too many movies, right? Um, but you are not going to get the outcome that you need for your organization. And you're not going to get a win-win outcome if you haven't actually planned out what you can and cannot trade. And what is a trade of adequate value and an acceptable level of risk. And so I think a lot of us go into a negotiation with only one offer in mind. And we also have not thought through what is the order in which I will present my offers, and how am I going to find that equilibrium where it's a win-win without giving away too much. You can absolutely plan that, and you absolutely should. It makes it much more likely that you're going to end up walking away happy and that the buyer is too.
Well, and we know that there's research that supports the best negotiators are actually the ones that do the planning and are prepared going in and anticipate they're not doing it on the fly. And I think you're right. As brilliant as many of our audience are,
Hmm.
nobody can think on the fly or think about all the different iterations. Having that planned out and even role playing it is one of the reasons I like the negotiation planner as well. Is let's go through it with a coach or a colleague, or let's role play that and practice. And then we're not surprised when the client says, "Well, no, we're never going to do that. We need you to do this." We're like, "Oh, we've already thought through that," and we have three different responses depending on how it's going. So
Sure.
that preparation creates more confidence. I think it creates more power for us because we're not getting caught flat-footed.
Yeah, and there's also a very practical matter that makes this kind of planning really essential. Correct me if I'm wrong, but believe SBI's research recently found that there's an average of 12 stakeholders
Yep,
in every deal.
yep.
12 stakeholders. What this means for most sellers is that you will never directly interact with the majority of the people who will decide your fate in a deal. You most likely will not directly meet with all 12 of them throughout the course of the deal. You will most likely directly interact with 4 to 6 max. And then what you're going to have to do to win is you're going to have to put your words in those 6 people's mouth and your thoughts in those 6 people's head and your documents in their hand. So that when they are in those internal conversations with the other 6 stakeholders who you're never going to talk to, that they are essentially co-selling on your behalf. You deputize them to sell on the
Right.
buyer side to the people that you're never going to talk to. You need to do this with your offers as well, because usually the person or people who is on the actual negotiation call with you are not the only people who will have to say yes. And so you might actually have to equip the people who you're talking to with a couple different scenarios that they can then go and talk through with the other decision makers that you're never going to interact with. If you've only offered one option, it increases the chances that you will get a no from the people that you don't have access to. And I know that saying the idea of not having access to all of your stakeholders to most sellers hits our ears like sacrilege. That's just the reality of today's market. That's If there's average of 12 stakeholders in every deal, you will probably never talk to all 12 of them.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, and even in that research, we identified transient decision makers, right? We have people swooping in and out, and all of a sudden they drop into a meeting, and you're like, what's their role? But
They're
you're
the
right.
most dangerous. Yeah.
Regardless of how well we've done mapping the organization, and then again by the end we may have different executives involved because they had a reorg or role changes. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the better we can do, as you said, to deputize or at least say, well, these are the options, these are the positions, I think puts us in a better situation. I wanted to take on one other thing you mentioned, and
Mhm.
when we think about the position the client's coming at us with, and it
Mhm.
could be, we're never going to do that, or take this, or we're never going to do business. We have these kind of demands that we get presented with, and we
Mhm.
always want to break that down. We talk a lot in the program about the interest behind the position. Why is
Mhm.
that so important? And maybe you have an example of how that comes to life.
Yeah. Well, the interest behind the position is really the why. So the position is, and I hope I'm not inverting these terms. Tell
Yeah,
me if I am. But the position is, this is the price we want. This is the contract term.
yeah.
That's what they want. It's the what. The interest is why they want it, right? Why do they want a 3-year contract? Why do they want 45-day net payment terms? You know, trying to negotiate on the what without understanding the why is the common analogy of treating the symptom rather than the disease, right? You don't have any context. One of my favorite examples of this, and I do this in all of my negotiations, and I love doing it, is they'll say, we require this price. I'll say, help me understand why. Price is something that most sellers take as just gospel. Someone tells us we're not going to pay more than this. We don't explore it. We just feel like we have to react to it. Discover everything, right? That's selling. So I will often ask people, okay, great. And let me ask you this. Let's say we can provide you with that price. What would that do for your business? I require them to walk me through their business logic for their price demand. And what I often find is they don't have any business logic for their price demand other than the fact that they want to pay less than they think they could be paying. That's not novel. That's not unique. So by doing that, what it allows me to do is it puts their demand for price into a different context. And it makes them think about the fact that, oh, I can't really attach a value outcome to this price other than the fact that I'll be paying less. It allows me to then emphasize other value levers, and it takes some of the fangs out of the price objection or where they've dug their heels in on price. That's one of my favorite things to do. Now, I'm a little bit of a nudge on this, honestly. I do require business reasoning for everything. And I love when people don't have it because then I can help shape it with them. And I say this a lot in our workshops, but if my options are yes, no, or I don't know, I will take I don't know from a buyer all day long. Because then I can collaborate with them in shaping how they view it and shape it to my benefit.
I love that. And I think, yeah, the more we can understand the why, we can creatively accommodate that maybe in very different ways, working with them instead of the take it or leave it. And I think that's what often ends up, getting presented. One of the examples I love is, when they say, well, we just don't have budget for that. I'm like, great. Can you just help me understand your budget cycle? And is that CapEx? Is that OpEx? Is that this quarter? Is that this year? Are there funds available from other, if the value is there, let's figure out a way to make this work. Maybe it's creative payment terms. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways that you can accommodate that once we understand. But if it's it's fixed and it's X amount, take it or leave it, then it's us versus them. And it is going to be a win-lose versus a win-win.
Yeah. And, an important distinction, budget and price are not the same thing. They are not the same business component, right? Price is money. Budget is money plus time or money plus timing. So when someone says to me, we don't have budget for it, I've trained myself to hear that not as we don't have money for it, but it's a timing thing. And then I'll dig in on it. I say, okay, well, yeah, what's your budget cycle? Is this just about the number or is it about the timing and the availability of your funding? The other thing I want to say, though, is that, to take it beyond just price, is that every motivation is not equal. So they might object on price first, or they might object on price most, but they're going to have various motivations. They're going to need a certain timeline for implementation or for delivery. They're going to need a certain capacity. They're going to need other things. And I want to explore what's their priority of those options. So it's not just the positions and the interests, but it's then stack ranking them. Because until I know the relationship of each of these needs in the mind of the buyers, I don't really have an understanding of what to trade. I can't plan my trades effectively until I fully understand their full value landscape. So I want to call that out to the listeners and the viewers as saying, don't just discover what matters to them, but discover the priority relationship between each of those things. And that's going to really give you a lot of important guidance on how to plan your trades and plan your offers in a way that's going to go to a win-win outcome.
Yeah, and I think it does really prepare us to have a much more informed and intelligent conversation then about how we can get to a desired outcome. The last area I wanted to cover, and I think we'll need a part 2 on this because there's so much more we aren't getting to, but would be a great discussion. But, the idea of trading versus conceding, and, we think about a concession as, hey, we're just giving something away. And I always love you know what, I'm not empowered to give things away for free. That's not how we do business. But
Yeah.
training ourselves to think in terms of give and get and what can we ask for in return. Can you talk more about that? Maybe you have an example of, how that comes to life, and then we'll wrap up on that.
I do. Yeah. So again, to nail down the difference, trading is I give something, I get something in return of equal or greater value. Concession is I give you something and I don't get anything back in the immediate.
We get hope, right? We get hope that they'll sign.
We get
Maybe.
hope. Now, I'm of the opinion that a concession should always be basically a down payment on a future benefit. So if I'm going to concede something, if I'm going to give you something and not get something back in the immediate time frame, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm first of all going to make sure that you know what it's costing me to give you that. This is if I had to pick like my favorite bullet on any slide from our value-driven negotiation curriculum, this is it. Make sure the buyer knows what it's costing you to concede that thing. They have to be trained and told what the value of it is. If they don't, you can't trade on it later.
You're giving it away for free. You're not getting credit. Yeah.
Exactly. So make sure they know what it's costing you so they attach a sense of value to it. That raises up the natural human response of, oh, they gave me something of value. I'm going to need to respond in kind. The other thing is you have to communicate to them that this is not setting a precedent. That this is a one-time thing for a specific reason, right? So conceding has to be packaged in specific forms of communication if it's going to not be to your detriment as a seller.
Well, I think the idea of trading, if they're asking for something, and maybe it is at the very end of the deal, and they're like, okay, well, I don't know, can you throw in the materials for free, or can you throw in shipping or something? And just training ourselves to say, you know what, I might be able to do that, but here's what I'm going to need, or here's what I'd like to do. And I mean, we see it all the time, right? Like, you know what would really help is to be able to close this deal this month. Now, if you're doing that, just saying, oh, urgency because I want to make my quota, that doesn't help the customer. If you're saying, well, let's get this done because I know you want to move forward and this would help me and I might be able to do this. So a trial balloon, and I think a trial balloon is always really good. I might be able to do this, but would you be able to do this for me? Would you be able to bring your boss to the next meeting so we can present and get the final approval? It's always a series of asks so that you're really training them that you don't give things away for free. And they're like, oh, that's right, Phil's going to ask me for something. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but it's just putting them on notice that, you know what, we don't give stuff away for free. That's not how we make money.
Yeah. I've got an example before I wrap up. Actually,
right.
It's going back to that chemical manufacturing example I gave earlier. We're often trading time for money. So if they say, hey, we've got to get our product to market by this time, can you put us in your schedule? Conceding would say, yes, we'll bump somebody else to put you in our schedule and not asking for anything else in exchange, right? Trading is, yes, we can give you the time frame you want, but it's going to incur costs for us. So it will impact your price. So what matters more to you, your timing or your money? That's what it is, right? And if you're going to concede, say, okay, if we give you this time slot and don't increase the price, here's what it's costing us to do that. That's a live example of what we're talking about.
No, that's a great one. It made me think. I'll just provide one other because I think it puts a point on it. We had a client where they wanted the discount at the very end of the deal and we say we don't like to discount, we like to trade, but they wanted to lower the price to hit a certain budget point. And we said, we could probably make that work if you would be willing to provide a testimonial and be a spokesperson if you're happy with the project. Totally. And they agreed to that. And then, we agreed to the price. And then they came back and said, you know what, we're not sure that we can do that publicly. So we'll pay the original price. So we actually protected our margin at the end of the day, and they honored that because they couldn't honor their trade. And in our case, we were actually thrilled because we got the higher price point and we still had a referenceable client. But I think
Yeah,
those types of creative options can be really valuable when you get stuck on some of those deals.
exactly. Because a win-win outcome does not mean that either party gives up nothing. By its nature, negotiation requires both parties to give up something. So I think it's an important final thought for us to wrap on, which is that negotiation is both parties not getting everything they want at the exact level that they want. It's what's the right calibration of sacrifice on both sides that still delivers the full range or even greater range of business value that all parties need.
I think that's actually a great place to wrap for today. Phil, it's been an honor, and I really appreciate all of your insights and being able to talk through this. And it does make me think we need a part two. There's a lot that we didn't get to, and to more to uncover. But I really appreciate your collaboration. I look forward to
Yeah,
next time.
I would love to talk more about this. Talk to
All
you
right.
soon.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to SBI's Enablement Insights podcast with Managing Director of Talent Development, Ray Makela hosting. Visit sbigrowth.com to read SBI's latest research, join upcoming events, or learn about SBI's GTM services. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and connect with us on LinkedIn.